None of the vegetation in Ratchet & Clank A Rift Apart reacts to you. This is partially why Insomniac are B-grade and can't make games of the years. Don't get me wrong, I've been enjoying Ratchet & Clank gameplay-wise. I think it's better than Spider-Man even. But $70 for a game like this? People say they're so impressed by Insomniac for releasing so many games in a quick amount of time. Well, it's because they make short games with oversight. I mean, come on people, this is $70, next-gen only game. It's not being restrained by 2013 hardware. Shit should actually exist and react. Stuff like this ruins the Pixar illusion. No footprints? So much for attention to detail. So, I'm starting to hate E3.
It is a goddamn white-hot arms race out there. A hype-eats-hype, media-fueled intimidation game of boss mode, knuckle-fuck nut-kick. And we are falling way the mother-effing ever shit behind.
Maybe I've already well past the point of that. Welcome to a Fluffbit. It's unscripted. Because if we script it, we'll think too hard about it and it'll take 2 days to release. Instead of the hopefully 2 hours this will take. But let's get down to brass tacks. What do I mean and why do I hate fun? Well, I don't hate fun, obviously. It's more that even outside of my abhorrent leftism, I gotta say, the game industry fucking sucks. And it's not just the companies. I mean, obviously there's a lot of hate for capital G gamers TM, but I think a big part of it is this cross-pollination. Stuff like these sentiments for photorealism and pushing the boundary of the medium and having footsteps and fucking fully animated horsecock is just one infects the other, you know? Because when games are given huge amounts of praise for their precise level of detail, and that's the general kind of games that we're used to, especially in the AAA sphere, which is, for those not following along, the Hollywood blockbuster of video games. It sets a weird fucking standard. And I mean, for example, Resident Evil 2 Remake came out and was very good, but was also very photorealistic, which for a game like that really fits. However, it's kind of a standard that's been pushed for a while, and Capcom shut down a fan remake of Resident Evil 2 years before the Resident Evil 2 remake release, just so that, you know, they get more traction for their game, which is kind of funny because big companies squashing fan games is kind of like the bread and butter of current year, considering Nintendo now has a reputation of just squashing every little fan game that seems to exist, to the point where if you want to make a fan game, people just say, don't talk about it, release it when it's done, and if it gets taken down, there'll be enough people to have downloaded it to redistribute it. Gosh, we live in a dystopia, don't we? Fuck. I can't believe that I'm making a video like this. I mean, our childhood stuff will be so fucking pissed, because we grew up wanting to go to E3 and Tokyo Game Show and stuff like that, waiting on pins and needles, even checking our phone or the computer when we were at school to see what the new video game announcements were. But it reminds us, they get you while you're young. Video game companies are like McDonald's. They sell you Happy Meals or your parents' Happy Meals, and if they get you hooked, well, best case scenario, you buy your kids Happy Meals. And I mean, it's not that I don't like modern high-end releases. We cried at not being able to play Resident Evil 2 Remake day one, and we got Resident Evil 3 Remake the day it came out. It was one of the first games we seriously streamed even. But even reception of that game reflected the common attitudes that a lot of gamers are having nowadays. The game's too short. It should have been DLC. And it's kind of gross. Like, I can't stand the attitude that all games have to be held to the same standard of detail, and that detail or graphical fidelity is synonymous with quality. And obviously, there are plenty of games that don't put quality as a benchmark through graphical fidelity. But oh my gosh, the games, especially games that are still somehow exclusive, tend to go that way. I mean, was it Horizon Wild West, whatever? Like, it already kind of has its own little pedigree as a series continuing in that big Sony tradition of games like that, and The Last of Us, and hell, even the zombie motorcycle game that I never played. It's just kind of like, this is what's impressive. I mean, it's definitely kind of the wet dream of people who grew up being like, wow, I really want games to look like people one day. I'm tired of all these polygons. And I mean, I remember for years we'd have to bite our tongue when people in our lives, not even like people on the internet, would poke fun at games that we liked that were kind of old or didn't put graphical fidelity first, right? Mostly just because we didn't want to argue, and it feels kind of weird defending, oh yeah, Resident Evil 2 is a great game, but you shouldn't make fun of the fact that there's no like hand dexterity. The B-movie campy feel of games like that are really neat, and it's the same kind of thing that pushes people to swear up and down that games like Fallout, for example, are good despite their jank. Sometimes the jank just makes it better, you know? But I think more than just the games are more than their graphics argument, I think a big reason why the AAA sphere is really shitty, especially right now, is because, well, crunch? That's not a hot take or a new take, really. But the thing is, stuff like that Twitter post I read at the beginning, and a lot of sentiments like it reflect the fact that, yeah, people are starting to expect certain amounts of fidelity and detail from their games. And I, for one, definitely piss myself when I see fucking footsteps in the mud or snow when I'm playing a game. Like, attention to detail can go a long way, but it's really just mise en scène. Extra. It's like salad dressing. It's not the meat. I guess I still usually have meat, bad metaphor. But what I mean to illustrate here is that those should be accoutrements. They shouldn't be like the main thing that you're evaluating the game through. And just the assertion that games that don't have like heavy reactability can't be games of the year is just, well, I want to call it preposterous. However, maybe it's just that the status quo is such that it is that I don't really have hope for video game awards or movie awards or anything like that, because, well, indie games, indie movies, small projects, fan games, all that shit gets kind of written off, you know? And to add insult to injury, the original reason I was even making this goddamn video was because of the fact that we refused to watch any actual E3 coverage this year. Because in a similar way to how I think a lot of people are obviously susceptible to monetization in video games, for example, stuff in gacha games, microtransactions, stuff like that, I think the wider video game industry can be a macrocosm of that sort of stuff. What do I mean by that? Well, there's this video there's this video essay on YouTube that talks about a lot of different perspectives on video game reviews and coverage, and what a lot of those people in that video had in common, other than working in games media obviously, was that from a young age they were kind of indoctrinated into video games media because, well, gaming magazines and review culture, always trying to put games in a box of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, and the same is true for us. We got into video games in a weird way. Like, we had an older sibling that had a Sega Genesis and had a bunch of games that we would play, but also he had a huge stack of video game magazines, and that was a world to all the games that we wanted to play. Like, it was so amazing just looking at the screenshots and reading all these things. But some of the stuff was basically just ads and reviews, and that's what a lot of it is. And just like what people were saying a lot more recently about video game reviewers kind of being in the pockets of developers, especially with the unbalanced power dynamic between creators who want to cover games and companies that want their games presented in a positive light to make more sales. And so it's conflict of interest, which is obviously why video games media people like ourselves, even as small as we are, always need to say, it's kind of a moral imperative to say, hey, I was given this game for free, I was given a review copy. You know, these are important facts. And I mean, when we first started doing YouTube stuff, way before we did this channel, we were doing video game journalism, or guerrilla video games journalism, precisely because we wanted to be part of that crowd. We wanted to be the type of people who, you know, got to go to the front of the line. We wanted to be one of the people who got a bash E3 legitimately. And I mean, E3 has allowed people who aren't in video games media, so the general public, to attend with really expensive tickets for a couple of years now, I believe. After living in LA for quite some time, we actually did meet some people who generally always went to E3 even though they weren't in games media, because there are ways, and it's not that hard. You could have gotten badges for E3 before that, and E3, even for games journalists and other games media people, was always kind of a making the pot sweeter, as it were. Not something outright to say, oh yeah, you're gonna give us a good review, right? But like, being at E3 was also kind of a boon to your brand, because it also is it's also like social currency of saying that you are important enough to go to E3, which I think is interesting, because video game critics like James Stephanie Sterling don't get as many big release review copies, if at all, anymore, because of being very critical of the industry. And especially starting this channel, we kind of felt like we had already made our crib to sleep in, of just, yeah, we're gonna be critical of video game companies. No one's gonna let us play their games for free or early. But that's only for the AAA sphere. Indie game developers aren't always like that. And I think that it's kind of nice to have that, to know that there is a pocket of the video game industry that isn't so much about buying their way to good reviews or just manipulating people to get their games, because they don't want people to be critical of their games. That's why there are sometimes stream or review embargoes, where you can't say anything bad about a game in like the first 24 or 48 hours that it is released, just so they can get those initial sales, just so they can get through those pre-order bonuses, you know? And I'm sure for most of my audience, none of this shit is new, right? But I got really pissed off on Twitter. Gosh, that's such a common sentiment, right? For seeing someone that we followed talking about how they were really irritated that Nintendo hadn't mentioned anything big, and that they better mention something good at E3 or they're gonna ignore Nintendo, as if Nintendo's feelings will be hurt. And of course, obviously I should just take it as venting, but especially because it was another content creator, it felt woefully uncritical of the industry as a whole, and I know that a lot of people aren't trying to do that, especially among streamers. Streamers are kind of like, oh whoa, look at me, I play games, watch me play games, we have fun time. I'm not deriding any streamers, at least not in general. But we've always strived to have our community be filled with criticism if, you know, it's warranted. And obviously because of our, I guess, political affiliation, we definitely don't shy away from talking about how capitalism is bad, or how video game companies aren't your friends. We literally made a video about it. But I think that there is a lot of people who just want to, you know, have fun. They don't want it to be critical about the thing. They want to, quote unquote, turn their brain off. And for the exploited, that's kind of hard. The exploited in this case, video game developers. Because remember, everybody, video game publishers are landlords. It's just a different hat, you know? And it sucks that so many companies have their own little independent game studios within them. They aren't really independent, they just have the face of that so they can overwork people even more.
Since 1975, Devolver Digital and the many incredible developers we've partnered with have produced what can only be appropriately described as an imperial buttload of incredible games that consumers worldwide have purchased, never actually played, and then made public claims about the game's quality in order to substantiate their place in online conversations about whether or not an indie game is still indie if it has a publisher.
Game publishers are also Galactus. But this whole thing is kind of gross in that the whole thing that I mentioned before with like magazines and shit is kind of the same that you'll find with the video game hype train, because it's this constant drip feed of hype. Like throughout the entire year, especially if you're really into video games and you've been keeping up with them for a while, even outside of the genres that you would participate in, you're gonna hear about those games. And I mean, especially as someone who works in game media and doesn't really know anyone anymore who I talk to on a regular basis that doesn't play video games, or even, hell, worse than video games media too. It's all we fucking hear, and we decided to not watch E3 partially because we were gonna hear all the fucking announcements anyway, and it's just like, can we just cut out the hype? And we don't even need a cliff notes because we have people in our lives that know the things that we care about, and we have followers and people in our community that not just, you know, have some inclination to the stuff we care about, but also get excited about things themselves. So like, when the Doki Doki Literature Club Plus announcement came out, we got like 3 DMs and people talking in our Discord. The thing with all the Marvel announcements for Square Enix, that was all over Twitter. There was no point. And when I went to Twitch earlier today, there was a ton of people just streaming, reacting to the announcements. And we're not any better than anyone else. I particularly remember us, maybe even me specifically, streaming some of the Resident Evil 8 announcements before that game came out. So like, you're not immune to propaganda. But that's exactly my point, is propaganda. Like, E3 is just a propagandist hype machine. I think the whole FOMO of, oh, the release date is coming soon, or the game is out today, which E3 loves to pull, and just the drip feed that you constantly get throughout the year that tends to culminate in E3, is just, it just makes me uncomfortable. And thinking back to that other creator on Twitter, I was thinking, and I even said, you're not gonna ignore Nintendo. Eventually they'll say something you care about. It's Nintendo. And I mean, I think that's true for most people who are into video games. Literally, even if you only play visual novels, I mean, it's kind of hard to have your head under a rock if you're in any way plugged into social media about new announcements, because gamers talk, because gamers are the biggest advertisement ever, and outrage sparks discussion as well. So them not doing what you want, them not releasing a new Half-Life game, that kind of works in their favor. Just like on YouTube, anyone disliking this video is really just pumping me in the algorithm. So dislike away if you hate it, but you know, it is what it is. And that is all to say, we are, like, again, we aren't immune to propaganda. And so I'm not gonna lie and say, like, we tried to figure out how we could get Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. Our birthday is coming up. Lucky us. The World Ends With You Neo is coming out next month. That's a big thing on our radar. That was one of the most influential games of our entire lifetime. And I mean, just like many other game fandoms, shit, even like something like Fallout, fans of The World Ends With You were strung along for so long. And it's kind of just like addiction. And it's like, I can stop anytime I want. Is that a new game? That's how it feels. And no matter what people say about virtue signaling or cancel culture, these big companies are completely immune to it to a degree. There's still gonna be people buying games from companies that do really bad stuff. And there's gonna be plenty of gamers who don't give a fuck about crunch because they want their game now, and that's the overwhelming majority of people. And even amongst the people who do care about developers getting unionized and, you know, having more rights, it basically boils down to, do I want to miss out on this game? Do I want to miss out on this game? And now, for better or worse, we are part of that industry, and it fucking blows, and it makes me feel so pessimistic about video games as a whole in general, and drives us even deeper down the well of indie games. But then again, indie games also have to propagate hype, because if no one notices your game, then you'll be however much time in the hole and no one will actually see your game. And as much as games are amazing and should exist for their own sake, and I wish video games could be free and we lived in a communist utopia, game devs gotta eat too, especially small studio game devs, self-published game devs, one-person game devs. And I mean, there's some amazing things. I really want to talk about Chicory, I forget how to pronounce it, later this week, because I played like 4 or 5 hours of it and it blew my fucking mind. And it's an indie game, and it's getting a lot of praise. And I mean, what indie developer doesn't want their game to be an indie darling? There are people already saying that game is heckin' Game of the Year material. And I looked and remembered, it's June. The year's half over. Like, there's so many games that could probably go on that list. I mean, and it's just like, time moves so quickly, and companies are like 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And I think E3 is obsolete, especially with the internet as it is, because how I'm experiencing E3 in terms of the game announcements is basically how I experience all of the game announcements throughout the year now, especially with everyone tragically online all the time. Like, people talk about it word of mouth, sharing YouTube videos. They don't have to be set up the way that they do. They could even still have press conferences throughout the year, just like the Nintendo Directs. It doesn't have to be a huge trade show. But of course, you have to also remember, it's not primarily for journalism either. It's the Electronic Entertainment Expo. It's for investors. It's to show people who are putting the money into the studios, hey, this is what is being brought. But also the hype machine behind it shows them, hey, look all this attention this is getting. Look at how much money is going to be thrown at these games. It's all connected. And that leads me to the silver fucking lining. The Mother Direct, which I watched. Someone in our Discord literally was talking about E3 announcements and mentioned it, and I was like, wait, Nintendo did not allow some sort of new Mother material to come out, right? There's no way. And I was right. Well, partially right.
By the way, did you know that this year's Mother Direct and the Mother Forever website are going to be featured in the next issue of Nintendo Force? They'll be covering this along with all of Nintendo's E3, so check them out at nintendoforcemagazine.com.
In that there's this huge thing called the Mother Direct that is modeled after the Nintendo Direct, very much in the same style. It's almost a parody of it. And it's pretty heckin' awesome. It showcased a bunch of indie games, fan translations of some of the games in the Mother series, as well as even a documentary or two about stuff that has to do with the Mother franchise. And I mean, stuff like this is going to go down in video game history, obviously, because, well, the Mother series is probably one of the most influential RPG series of all time. Especially now. I mean, Yume Nikki, Lisa, Amori, there's so many games I could name drop that have gotten inspiration from the Mother series, or were inspired by something that was inspired by the Mother series. It's like the Avatar cycle. There's just more and more great games that have some of the same core ideas that just iterate in a very unique way. And I think it's amazing that they were allowed to do this. But also remember, well, maybe you don't know, there was an unofficial Mother 4 gonna come out, and Nintendo tried to shut that down. And they tried to change the name so that they could still release it. Though, especially high-profile indie games that have taken years to develop tend to have a reputation for maybe they'll never come out. But that's also because resources are hard, and resources are hard to come by. And time is also a factor. And most people working on some of these more advantageous indie games have to work on it in their spare time. They have to hope and pray, maybe, just maybe, their Kickstarter goes through. Not to say that games that have failed their Kickstarters haven't released, but obviously it's much less likely. And I mean, the failure rate, or I should say, the rate at which indie games are not completed, take long stretches of time, are completely abandoned by the developers for whatever reason, is super high. But I think that's influenced our take that even an unfinished game is still a game worth playing. And I mean, going along with watching the Mother Direct live showed a lot of people doing some of the same things that I see people talking about online when discussing stuff with E3. This game's just this with this. This game's just this with this. And it's just, there's the limitless comparisons to stuff like Undertale and whatnot that leave games in this weird space of being in the shadow of other games, even if they've been in development for longer or they have no direct influences from those games. And obviously that's just something that's going to happen because especially for gaming, using other games as a reference point is a very easy way to communicate what you mean. Very much in the same way that if I say, oh, this game is a turn-based RPG but also a Souls-like, you tend to know what I'm talking about, even if you don't know the specifics of how it's emulating the Souls games or the general accepted overview of what it takes to be a Souls game. Language is just a shortcut to a conversation. But I digress. I was super blown away by some of the games in the Mother Direct. Actually, all of them in a way, because not only are they under this umbrella of just Nintendo could, shut down a lot of this, it was also just a lot of passion. And seeing so many games inspired by the Mother series all in one place, all at one time, is kind of amazing because, it's usually really, really sparse. So game catalogs like that, I think, are very important. So I don't think that game shows or directs are bad in and of themselves, but I do think the hype machine of them can be quite shitty. And I mean, there are unfortunately too many games and not enough time, even for a streamer. And I think that we're well past the point of having a certain amount of video games that we couldn't fully complete every single game in our libraries before we die. Especially considering global catastrophe will reach the global north eventually. Catastrophic climate collapse. Sorry for the doomerism, everybody. But sometimes I think about just how important games are to us, and like leaving that lasting legacy is important, and it's not that everything you do has to be in service of leaving that legacy, or even treating people the best, though I'd like to treat people the best. Sometimes you do have to think of yourself, do self-care, not always put others before yourself even. But I think a lot of things that Mother represents for a lot of people, and the messages that I saw in a lot of the games, overcoming dysfunction, growing up in a world that you were given rose-tinted glasses for, that they actually snatch away the minute you try to focus on it, really makes me want to fight even harder for a world where things are a little bit more fair for me and my comrades. This has been a bit of fluff, and I'll link the Nintindont. Maybe that's all I'll name it. Mother does what Nintindont. Shit. I also almost didn't mention, apparently the games that were announced are getting circulation in a Nintendo-related magazine, so it seems that Nintendo is softening their stance on some of this stuff.
Not this time. It never happened. It's false.
But, still keeping hard to their different kinds of copyright shenanigans. It's like, as long as you follow these guidelines, we won't shut you down. Because I can imagine even the fact of doing Mother Directs might have made Nintendo angry if they didn't give some sort of go-ahead in the first place. But of course, fan games and stuff that says this is directly inspired by games made by Nintendo, quote-unquote made by Nintendo, does give Nintendo publicity. And to top that all off, one of the documentaries that was previewed at the Direct,
I was always looking at the schedule. This is when it's coming. This is when it is. And then it was, nope, we're not going to do that.
Our first step was to figure out how this game ended up online in the first place. This was an unreleased game for the original Nintendo. How did it end up on the internet for everyone to download and play?
Is this illegal or not?
We have a lot of problems, and not the first of which is probably just theft from the company, right?
Nobody really knew what this was at this point. Is it legit? Can we buy it?
I wish I had the files that I had when I worked at Nintendo. Most likely somebody took all those and most of them just ran in the shredder.
And to top it all off, one of the movies that was shown during the Mother Direct was a documentary about how the first Mother game got localized unofficially. And it only happened because someone who worked for Nintendo decided to break the law. And it kind of reminds us that video game companies overall don't care about video game preservation. They don't care about this history that we care about, even if they pretend to, even if they cater to our need for validation through the old games that we used to love, even if they leverage our nostalgia against us and try to get us to buy game after game after game while increasing the average price of games at a time where people are a lot more strapped for cash than they've ever been. And it reminds me that the fan translation / modding community / fan game community is better than the AAA video game community. And that's kind of sad, but I mean, that's how the capitalism crumbles. I hope it crumbles. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to get my frustration out and kind of just illustrate how we want things to change a little bit, and how the Mother Direct was something that gave us a lot of hope for things changing for the better in the future. Although at the same time, my pessimism still kind of slaps me in the back of the head, because stuff like this only exists because it's allowed. Thanks, everybody. Hi everybody, it's me, Duskbyte. Thanks for watching till the end, we really appreciate it. Hope you hate Nintindont as much as we do. But anyway, we'd like to thank our wonderful patrons, Madame Issy, Joystick, and finally, Apollo, Valued Customer, and Tinlufu. Thank you all so much. You are one of the reasons we're able to keep going. If anyone else would like to add on the spirit bomb that is supporting the Fluffs, we do have a Patreon you can follow us at. We recently retooled the tiers, so you get more out of it than ever, even at the lowest tier. If this is your first time finding our content, hi. We're a plural DID furry system. A bunch of furries hiding in a flesh mech. We make a lot of content that has to do with video games and anime, usually from an analytical lens. This is a little bit more experimental in terms of the content we usually make. But if you like, comment, ring the bell, and subscribe, maybe we'll make more if you like it. We are very curious on how this video will be received, because it might increase the number of subs we get in the future. But numbers aside, we just like to spread acceptance and criticism to industries that really need it, at least industries that we're a part of. A lot of our content focuses on mental health and the downfall of capitalism. Oh, and lest I forget, we are Twitch streamers. We'll be doing a 24-hour all-queer indie game stream on June 25th at 5:30 PST. It's to raise money for our living expenses, because COVID and being disabled has hit us as hard as really anyone. We really appreciate any help and support you can give, even if it's just spreading the word. We also have merch and shit. It's a living. Well, that'll be all. Appreciate your bites. Please take care of yourselves the best you can. And if you can't, reach out to someone who may be able to help. You never know who might cast out a lifeline. Good night, everybody. Good night.
A developer even thinks of an idea and that shit's already for sale.
Boom!
Devolver Digital Screen Pay allowed loudmouth consumers to not only throw money at their screens, but to throw money at our federally unregistered offshore corporate bank accounts. Cha-ching!